December 1698. Mozambique Island. Portuguese traders stand at the edge of a stone pit, watching something move in the water below. The pit measures 40 feet across. Stone walls descend 20 feet into brackish seawater pumped in from the Indian Ocean. In that water, 17 Nile crocodiles, each between 12 and 16 feet long, circle endlessly. A Dutch merchant named Peter van der Berg records what he witnesses in his journal. The condemned are brought in chains. The Portuguese call it juízo de Deus, the judgment of God. If the crocodiles refuse them, they are innocent. If the reptiles feed, guilt is proven. By the end of that month, 143 captured Africans will enter that pit. Only 6 will emerge alive. The Portuguese authorities will call it divine justice. They'll say the crocodiles possess supernatural discernment, that they can smell guilt on human skin. But the truth was far more terrifying. Before we uncover the truth about the Mozambique crocodile trials, make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We're diving into one of history's most brutal intersections of human trafficking and pseudoscientific cruelty. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers worldwide. Now, let's journey back to the Indian Ocean trade routes of the 17th century. The year is 1698. The Portuguese Empire has controlled Mozambique Island for nearly 2 centuries. This small coral island, barely 2 miles long, serves as the linchpin of Portugal's East African slave trade network. The island sits like a jewel in the Mozambique Channel, its natural harbor capable of sheltering dozens of ships. Stone fortresses line the waterfront. The Fort of São Sebastião, completed in 1558, dominates the northern tip, its walls 20 feet thick, designed to withstand both European rivals and local resistance. But in 1698, Portugal faces a crisis. The Dutch East India Company controls most Indian Ocean shipping lanes. English privateers raid Portuguese vessels with impunity. And most critically, the supply of enslaved Africans has become unpredictable. Resistance movements in the interior make capture operations dangerous. The Maravi Confederacy to the northwest has begun organized raids on Portuguese slaving parties. Local chiefs who once cooperated now demand higher prices or refuse to trade entirely. Captain Major António Lobo de Silva governs Mozambique Island with absolute authority. His correspondence with Lisbon reveals his obsession with control. In a letter dated March 1698, he writes, "The Negroes grow bold, they resist, they flee, they poison our men. We require methods that instill not mere fear but supernatural terror." De Silva is a second son of minor Portuguese nobility. Barred from inheritance, he sought fortune in the colonies. He arrived in Mozambique in 1694 with a reputation for creative cruelty. In Goa, he'd pioneered the use of trained dogs in tracking escaped slaves. In Mozambique, he would devise something far worse. The island's permanent population numbers around 3,000, mostly Portuguese settlers, Swahili merchants, and enslaved Africans who worked the households and fortifications. But this number swells during slaving season from May to September, when captives arrive from the interior. These captured Africans are held in the barracoons, stone slave pens built into the fort walls. The largest barracoon can hold 500 people in spaces designed for 200. They wait there, sometimes, for months, until ships arrive to transport them to Brazil, the Caribbean, or Portuguese colonies in Asia. But 1698 brings complications. A measles outbreak in June kills 70 captives. In July, a fire destroys 1 barracoon, allowing 32 people to escape into the mainland. The Portuguese recapture only 11. By August, de Silva faces pressure from Lisbon to maintain quotas while losses mount. It's in this pressure cooker environment that de Silva resurrects an ancient practice: trial by ordeal, the medieval belief that God will intervene to protect the innocent and punish the guilty through physical tests. Europe has largely abandoned such practices, but in the colonies away from scrutiny, old methods resurface. De Silva commissions the construction of a specialized holding pit near the fort's eastern wall. The design is precise, deep enough that no human can climb out, connected to the ocean so seawater flows in with the tides, and reinforced with stones to prevent collapse. Then he orders the capture of Nile crocodiles from the Mozambique mainland. The first crocodiles arrive in September 1698. Local hunters bring them bound with ropes, their jaws tied shut with leather straps. These are not small specimens. De Silva specifically requests mature adults, 15 feet or longer, with proven records of attacking humans. Father Manuel Godinho, a Jesuit priest assigned to the island, records his unease in letters sent back to the order's headquarters in Lisbon. Captain de Silva speaks of the crocodiles as instruments of divine will. He quotes scripture, "The wicked shall be cast into the jaws of death," but there is something in his eyes when he watches the beasts that speaks not of faith, but of fascination with suffering. The pit itself becomes an attraction. Portuguese soldiers and settlers gather to watch the crocodiles during feeding times. The reptiles are given goats, pigs, and occasionally dogs. Witnesses describe the methodical efficiency of the attacks, the sudden explosion from the water, the death roll that tears flesh from bone, the way the crocodiles stash larger prey underwater to soften before consumption. By late September, the pit holds 8 crocodiles. De Silva begins preparing his justification for what comes next. He circulates a proclamation throughout the slave barracoons. Any captive accused of planning escape, of poisoning food, of assaulting guards, or of seditious talk will face trial by crocodile. If they survive 15 minutes in the pit, they will be granted freedom and allowed to return to their homeland. If they die, their guilt is confirmed by divine judgment. The first trial occurs on October 3, 1698. A man named Zumba, captured from the Makua people 6 months earlier, is accused of organizing an escape attempt. 3 other captives have allegedly informed on him, though later evidence suggests these accusations were extracted through torture. Zumba is brought to the pit at dawn. A crowd of perhaps 200 people gathers, Portuguese officials, soldiers, settlers, and enslaved Africans forced to watch as warning. Peter Vanderberg, the Dutch merchant, watches from the fort walls. His journal entry provides the most detailed account. The man showed no fear. He spoke in his tongue, perhaps prayers or curses. The Portuguese lowered him on ropes. The moment his feet touched water, the crocodiles came. It was finished in seconds. The water turned red. The Portuguese declared God's judgment rendered. Zumba's remains are left in the pit. De Silva orders that bodies not be retrieved. Let the reptiles feast on guilt, he declares. Over the next 2 weeks, 6 more trials occur. The accused are charged with various offenses: theft, assault, plotting rebellion. None survive beyond a few minutes. The pattern becomes clear. De Silva is not seeking justice, but establishing terror. Word of the crocodile trials spreads along the East African coast. Slave traders in Kilwa and Zanzibar hear the stories. Some are appalled, others see utility in the fear it generates. But something shifts in November. The number of trials accelerates dramatically. On November 12th, 13 captives face trial in a single day. They are accused of stealing food from the fort stores. Evidence is circumstantial: a broken lock, some missing grain sacks. The trials proceed assembly line fashion. One captive after another is lowered into the pit. Father Godinho confronts De Silva that evening. A Portuguese clerk named João Alvarez later testifies about the conversation he overhears. The priest demanded to know by what authority these trials proceed. Captain De Silva responded that his authority comes from God and the crown in that order. Father Godinho said the crocodiles do not judge. They merely kill whatever enters their domain. De Silva smiled and replied, "Then all who enter are guilty, for God would not deliver the innocent unto death." The next day, Father Godinho attempts to send a letter to his superiors detailing the abuses. De Silva's men intercept it. The priest is confined to his quarters for illness and placed under guard. By late November, the crocodile pit has become the primary method of controlling the captive population. Any resistance, any complaint, any perceived slight leads to accusation and trial. The pens grow quieter. Captives stop speaking to one another, fearing informant. But then something unexpected happens. On November 28th, a woman named Nyambura faces trial. She is accused of cursing a Portuguese guard who struck her child. She's lowered into the pit at midday. The sun beats down. The water ripples with crocodile movement. Nyambura begins singing. It's a Kikuyu song, later translated as a prayer to ancestral spirits. Her voice carries across the fort grounds. She treads water in the center of the pit. Minutes pass. 5, 10, 15. The crocodiles circle but don't attack. Vanderberg records the scene. The Portuguese grew agitated. 20 minutes passed. The woman continued singing. The beasts approached and retreated, as if uncertain. At 30 minutes, Captain De Silva ordered her removed. She was pulled from the water unharmed. I saw his face, not relief but fury. According to the trial's rules, Nyambura should be freed. Instead, De Silva orders her returned to the barracoons. The test was incomplete, he declares. She will face trial again when God's signs are clearer. 3 days later, on December 1st, Nyambura is brought back to the pit. This time, De Silva orders the crocodile starved for 48 hours beforehand. She doesn't survive 15 seconds. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. It helps us continue uncovering these buried chapters of history. Share this with someone who needs to understand the true depths of colonial brutality. Let's discover what happens next as December 1698 becomes the deadliest month in Mozambique Island's dark history. December 1698 brings a frenzy of trials. The numbers are staggering. De Silva's own records, later seized by Portuguese authorities, document 118 trials conducted between December 1st and December 28th. The charges become increasingly absurd. Looking at a guard with hostility, singing a heathen song, refusing food which De Silva interprets as attempted suicide and therefore evidence of demonic possession. But the true horror emerges not from Portuguese sources but from the testimony of survivors and witnesses who escape or are later freed. In 1702, 4 years after the events, a formerly enslaved man named Camus reaches Zanzibar. He'd been held in the Mozambique barracoons during the crocodile trials, but was shipped to Goa before facing trial himself. In Goa, he escaped and eventually made his way back to East Africa. An Arab merchant named Ahmad Ibn Said records Camus's testimony. He said the Portuguese would choose victims by lottery when accusations ran short. They would place marked stones in a basket, draw a marked stone, face the crocodiles. The Portuguese wanted fear. They wanted the captives so terrified that rebellion became unthinkable. But more than this, he said the captain had become obsessed. He would watch every trial from start to finish. He would time how long each victim survived. He kept meticulous notes about which techniques of introduction produced which responses from. The crocodiles. De Silva's confiscated journals confirm this obsession. Page after page contains observations. Subject 47 male, approximately 25 years, entered water feet first. Crocodile attack from left rear. Duration 23 seconds. Subject 48 female, approximately 30 years. Entered water head first. Multiple crocodile response. Duration 8 seconds. He's conducting experiments. The trials aren't about justice. They're about studying human terror and crocodile predation patterns. By mid-December, even the Portuguese soldiers grow uneasy. A soldier named Martim Correa later testifies during the investigation. We began to call the pit Boca do Inferno, mouth of hell. The smell of death hung over that part of the fort. The crocodiles grew fat. Their movements became sluggish from overfeeding. Still, the captain ordered more trials. On December 15th, a group of 30 captives is accused en masse of planning a revolt. The evidence consists of one overheard conversation between two men. De Silva orders all 30 tried. The trials take all day. By evening, the water in the pit has become thick with blood. The crocodiles, gorged beyond capacity, barely respond to the later victims. Several captives drown in the churning water before the reptiles even reach them. That night, Father Godinho breaks his confinement. Despite guards, he manages to write a letter that he gives to a sympathetic Portuguese sailor scheduled to depart the next day. The letter reaches Lisbon in March 1699. In it, Father Godinho writes, "I have witnessed hell made manifest on earth. The captain claims divine sanction, but I see only Satan's work. Nearly 200 souls have perished in that pit. The crocodiles have become instruments not of God's judgment, but of one man's descent into barbarism. If the Church does not act, if the Crown does not intervene, we betray every principle of Christian mercy and human decency. I beg you, send investigators, end this abomination." But the intervention comes not from Lisbon but from an unexpected source. On December 20th, a Dutch trading vessel arrives at Mozambique Island. The captain is Hendrik Adriaan van Ried, a high-ranking official of the Dutch East India Company. He's come to negotiate trading rights with De Silva. Van Ried is accompanied by Van der Berg, the merchant who's been documenting the trials. Van der Berg shows Van Ried his journals. The Dutch captain is horrified, not from moral outrage but from practical concern. The crocodile trials are generating tales of Portuguese brutality that are spreading throughout the Indian Ocean trade networks. This could damage all European trading relationships with East African chiefs. Van Ried demands to witness a trial. De Silva, eager to demonstrate Portuguese authority, agrees. On December 22nd, Van Ried watches as 5 captives face trial. His official report to the Dutch East India Company, later shared with Portuguese authorities, describes the scene. The prisoners show, wed no resistance. They had been broken beyond hope. The Portuguese lowered them as one might lower cargo into a ship's hold. The reptiles performed as expected, which is to say, they killed efficiently and without discrimination. Captain de Silva watched with an expression I can only describe as rapturous. This is not justice, this is theater of cruelty, designed to crush human spirit entirely. Van Riede's report proves crucial. The Dutch East India Company shares it with Portuguese merchants in Goa, who forward it to Lisbon. Combined with Father Godinho's letter, it creates pressure for investigation. But before any investigation can reach Mozambique Island, the crocodile trials end abruptly. On December 28, 1698, de Silva orders a mass trial. 42 captives, essentially everyone accused of any infraction in the previous week, are to face the pit together. It's an unprecedented escalation. The pit isn't designed for such numbers. The logistics alone present challenges. How to lower 42 people without causing mass panic or premature drowning. De Silva solves this by having the captives tied together in groups of 6, then lowered simultaneously on multiple ropes. What happens next is described by multiple witnesses with remarkable consistency. The first group enters the water. The crocodiles, habituated now to easy prey, converge. But the weight of 6 bound humans, all struggling, creates chaos. Ropes tangle. Bodies pull in different directions. One rope snaps. 6 captives plunge into the water in an uncontrolled fall. The impact startles the crocodiles, which retreat momentarily. In that moment, several captives break free of their bonds. The knotwork, rushed in preparation for mass trial, proves inadequate. 3 captives reach the pit's wall and begin trying to climb the stone. Portuguese soldiers fire muskets down into the pit. The bullets miss the climbing captives but strike the water, further agitating the crocodiles. One captive, a young man whose name is not recorded, actually gets his hands over the pit's edge. A Portuguese soldier strikes at him with a pike, but the man dodges, and the pike blade lodges in the stone. For perhaps 30 seconds there's genuine chaos. Multiple captives are free in the water. Crocodiles are attacking but also confused by the noise and commotion. Soldiers are shouting. De Silva is screaming orders. Then a crocodile, perhaps 16 feet long, bursts from the water with such force that it gets its front legs over the pit's edge. It's a hunting technique Nile crocodiles use, launching themselves partially onto riverbanks to grab prey. The Portuguese soldier closest to the edge stumbles backward. The crocodile slides back into the pit, pulling the pike with it. The mass trial devolves into massacre. By the time order is restored, all 42 captives are dead. 3 Portuguese soldiers are wounded, 1 seriously from a musket misfire, and de Silva's carefully maintained system of divine judgment has revealed itself as what it always was, mechanized slaughter barely controlled by human hand. That evening, de Silva orders the pit drained and sealed. No explanation is given. The official investigation begins in April 1699 when 2 royal investigators arrive from Goa. They are Gaspar de Souza Coutinho, a crown magistrate, and Father Bartolomeu de Miranda, representing the Church's Inquisition. Their mandate is to examine reports of irregular judicial proceedings in Mozambique. The investigation will take 7 months. What they find is meticulously documented barbarism. De Silva had kept detailed records. His journals contain entries for 143 crocodile trials conducted between October 3 and December 28, 1698. Only 6 captives survived the full 15-minute test period. Of those 6, only 1 was actually freed. The others were retried or died of injuries sustained in the pit. But the journals reveal something more disturbing. De Silva's documentation includes observations about which ethnic groups showed more or less fear, which ages survived longest, which methods of binding produced the most entertaining struggles. The word entertaining appears 17 times in his notes. Father Miranda writes in his report, "These records demonstrate not judicial process but systematic study of human suffering." The captain claims religious justification, yet his writings contain no prayers, no invocations of divine mercy, no recognition of these victims as possessing immortal souls. They are livestock to him. Livestock used not for sustenance but for spectacle. The investigators interview survivors. 43 captives who were present during the trial period but never faced the pit themselves give testimony. Their accounts corroborate the essential facts: arbitrary accusations, no genuine evidence, trials designed to terrify rather than judge. Portuguese soldiers and settlers also testify. Most defend de Silva's actions as necessary for maintaining order. A few expressed discomfort but claimed they were following orders. One soldier, Martim Correa, provides damning testimony. By December, the captain no longer bothered with formal accusations. He would walk through the barracoons and simply point. That one, those three. We would take them to the pit. Some soldiers began wagering on survival times. The captain did not discourage this. Once I saw him collect winnings from such a wager. The investigators examined the pit itself. Though drained and sealed, the stones still show evidence of what transpired. Claw marks score the walls. Bloodstains persist despite attempts at cleaning. The drainage channel that connected the pit to the ocean is clogged with bone fragments. Father Miranda orders the pit excavated under church supervision. Workers remove the stones blocking the drainage channel and pump out the remaining water. What they find turns even hardened soldiers' stomachs. The pit's bottom is covered with human remains. The crocodiles had stashed bodies underwater, a natural behavior for Nile crocodiles who cache large prey to soften it before consumption. In the December chaos, when trials came too rapidly for the crocodiles to fully consume each victim, the reptiles simply stored them. The excavation recovers partial remains of at least 78 individuals. Many show clear evidence of crocodile predation, crushed skulls, severed limbs, torsos torn open. But some show different injuries, musket wounds, pike punctures, evidence of drowning rather than reptile attack. De Souza Coutinho writes, "We must conclude that an unknown number of victims perished from Portuguese weapons or drowning, their deaths later attributed to divine judgment via crocodile. This transforms judicial murder into simple murder disguised by theater. The investigation turns to the crocodiles themselves. The 17 reptiles used in the trials were released back into mainland waters after the pit's closure. Local hunters are commissioned to recapture them for examination. Only 9 are recovered. The others either escaped to distant territories or were killed by local villagers who recognized them as the death crocodiles from Portuguese atrocities. One recovered crocodile is found to have fragments of Portuguese uniform cloth in its stomach, evidence that it had indeed attacked the soldier during the December 28th chaos. By October 1699, the investigators prepare their final report. It is delivered to the Governor-General in Goa and forwarded to Lisbon, arriving in January 1700. The report concludes, Captain Major António Lobo de Silva has committed grave offenses against God, Crown, and humanity. Under guise of judicial proceedings, he orchestrated the systematic murder of 137 enslaved persons. He corrupted Christian doctrine to justify personal cruelty. He endangered Portuguese colonial stability through creation of terror-based control that generates resistance rather than compliance. He has brought shame upon Portuguese honor in the eyes of other European powers and native populations alike. The report recommends de Silva be removed from command, arrested and tried for murder, but politics intervenes. António Lobo de Silva comes from a well-connected family. His cousin serves in the royal court. His uncle is a bishop. These connections matter in 17th century Portugal, where colonial administrators typically enjoy broad immunity for actions taken overseas. Additionally, some crown officials argue that prosecuting de Silva would set dangerous precedent. Colonial governance relies on administrators having latitude to maintain control through harsh measures. Putting de Silva on trial might embolden colonized peoples to bring accusations against other Portuguese officials. The crown's solution is bureaucratic compromise. De Silva is removed from his position but not formally charged. He is recalled to Lisbon in March 1700 for reassignment. The official R. Ecord states he is being transferred due to health concerns and the tropical climate's effect on European constitution. He never faces trial. Instead, de Silva is given a modest administrative position in Portugal's home territories, a post in the Royal Customs House that provides income without authority. He lives quietly in Lisbon until his death in 1711. Father Godinho is also recalled. Unlike de Silva, Godinho receives no official censure, but his ecclesiastical career stalls. He is never promoted beyond parish priest, assigned to a small church in rural Portugal, where he serves until his death in 1716. His letters suggest he viewed this as punishment for speaking out. The investigators themselves face consequences. De Souza Coutinho is passed over for higher appointments, his career trajectory permanently flattened after delivering the damning report. Father Miranda returns to inquisitorial work but is never assigned high-profile cases again. The message is clear. Exposing colonial atrocities is politically dangerous even for the exposers. But what about the victims? What justice, if any, do they receive? The answer is virtually none. The surviving captives who testified during the investigation remain enslaved. They are eventually shipped to various Portuguese colonies, Brazil, Goa, Macau. There is no compensation, no acknowledgement of their suffering beyond their names and investigative records. The 6 individuals who survived the crocodile trials and were not immediately retried receive no special consideration. 4 are confirmed to have been shipped to Brazil in 1700. The other 2 disappear from historical record, likely died of disease in the barracoons. The families of the 137 victims receive no notification of their deaths. Many families likely never learned what happened to their captured relatives, knowing only that they were taken by Portuguese raiders and never returned. The crocodile pit itself is dismantled. The stones are repurposed for other fort construction. By 1702, no physical evidence remains of where the pit once stood. Portuguese authorities in Mozambique issue new guidelines for handling captives. Trials must follow established legal procedures. Physical punishments must not result in death except in cases of violent rebellion, and trials by ordeal or animal combat are explicitly forbidden. But enforcement is inconsistent. Other forms of brutal control continue throughout Mozambique and other Portuguese colonies. The specific method changes, but the underlying system of terror-based management persists. One lasting effect: the crocodile trials become part of regional oral tradition. Stories spread throughout East Africa about the Portuguese crocodile fort. These stories serve as warning and resistance narrative, evidence of European brutality that justifies opposition to colonial power. In some versions of the stories, passed down through generations, the captives who died in the pit are said to have cursed the Portuguese, prophesying the eventual end of colonial rule. Whether such curses were actually spoken, or are later additions to the narrative, they reflect how colonized peoples processed and resisted the trauma inflicted upon them. The Mozambique crocodile trials represent a convergence of several dark currents in colonial history: pseudoscientific racism, bureaucratized cruelty, and the complete dehumanization necessary to sustain the slave trade. Trial by ordeal had deep roots in European history. Medieval courts regularly used trials by fire, water, and combat to determine guilt. The underlying logic was that God would intervene to protect the innocent, that divine justice would override natural law. By 1698, such practices had largely disappeared from European legal systems. The Enlightenment was bringing emphasis on evidence, reason, and procedural justice. But in the colonies, especially in spaces where enslaved populations outnumbered colonizers, administrators reverted to older, more savage methods. De Silva's innovation was to combine trial by ordeal with industrialized efficiency. Previous iterations of such trials involved individual cases, treated with some ceremonial weight. De Silva turned it into assembly line processing, dozens of victims per week, minimal pretense of actual judgment, the reptiles functioning as living execution machines. This reflected a broader colonial mindset. The enslaved were not really human, so normal legal and moral constraints didn't apply. What would be murder if the victims were Portuguese became acceptable judicial process when the victims were African captives. The crocodile trials also reveal the psychological effects of colonial power on colonizers themselves. De Silva wasn't born a monster. His early career in Portugal showed no particular signs of sadism. But colonial systems, which granted Europeans godlike power over colonized peoples, created conditions where sadism could flourish unchecked. Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil applies here. De Silva kept meticulous records. He filed reports. He justified his actions through religious and administrative frameworks. The atrocity wasn't aberrant madness, but rather the logical endpoint of a system built on treating humans as commodities. Similar cases emerged throughout colonial history when examined closely. In the Belgian Congo, Leopold II's agents used amputation as punishment and control mechanism, cutting off hands of workers who failed to meet rubber quotas. Like the crocodile trials, this was systematic, documented, justified through frameworks of discipline and productivity. In German Southwest Africa, now Namibia, colonial authorities used concentration camps and forced labor to suppress the Herero and Namakwa peoples in 1904 and 1908, resulting in what many scholars consider the first genocide of the 20th century. Again, documented, bureaucratized, justified. In the Caribbean and American colonies, enslavers devised countless creative punishment methods: iron masks, breaking wheels, slow burnings, each intended not just to punish individual victims, but to terrorize entire enslaved populations into compliance. The crocodile trials fit this pattern. They were spectacle as much as punishment, designed to be witnessed, to generate stories, to create such fear that rebellion became psychologically impossible. But such methods never fully succeeded in their aims. Terror generates compliance in the short term, but resistance in the long term. The very extremity of the crocodile trials became part of the narrative arsenal of anti-colonial resistance. The trials also highlight a grim truth about historical documentation. We know about the Mozambique crocodile trials primarily because Portuguese officials documented them. Silva kept journals. Investigators filed reports. These documents survived in colonial archives. How many similar atrocities occurred without documentation? How many colonial administrators committed comparable horrors but destroyed the evidence or simply never recorded it? The crocodile trials may be exceptional only in being unusually well documented, not in being unusually cruel. Modern scholars studying colonial violence face this challenge constantly. The archives are incomplete, biased toward administrative perspectives, and often sanitized. The voices of victims appear primarily through the filters of their oppressors' records. In the case of the Mozambique trials, we have some African voices, Camas's testimony, recorded secondhand, and the brief statements recorded by Portuguese investigators interviewing captives. But these fragments represent a tiny fraction of the 137 victim stories. We don't know most of their names. We don't know their homelands, their families, their dreams. History remembers de Silva's name because he was Portuguese, educated, connected to power. The people he murdered are largely anonymous. This asymmetry in historical memory is itself a form of ongoing violence, the erasure that follows the initial destruction. Yet studying cases like the crocodile trial serves important purposes. It counters sanitized narratives of colonialism that focus on exploration, trade, and cultural exchange, while ignoring the foundations of violence. It reveals the systems and psychologies that made such horrors possible, and it honors the victims by refusing to let their suffering be forgotten entirely. The trials also connect to contemporary issues. Mass incarceration systems, immigration detention centers, and other modern institutions that cage and dehumanize people echo the barracoons of Mozambique Island. The particulars differ, but the underlying logic, that certain people can be stripped of rights, dignity, and even the recognition of their humanity, persists. Understanding historical atrocities like the crocodile trials isn't just about remembering the past. It's about recognizing patterns that continue in different forms, about maintain vigilance against the systems and mindsets that enable mass cruelty. The crocodile pit was eventually dismantled, but the willingness to treat some humans as disposable, that architect of atrocity, has proved far more durable. The Mozambique crocodile trials stand as testament to how systems of oppression corrupt both victims and perpetrators. António Lobo da Silva began as an ambitious colonial administrator and descended into calculated barbarism. The 137 Africans who died in that pit were individuals with names, families, and futures stolen by the machinery of human trafficking. What do you think drove da Silva to such systematic cruelty? Was it the absolute power granted by colonial systems, the dehumanization necessary to profit from slavery, a personal psychological darkness given free rein by distance from oversight? Leave your theories in the comments below. And here's a question worth considering. How many similar atrocities occurred throughout colonial history, but left no paper trail, no investigation, no evidence except oral traditions dismissed by academic historians? The crocodile trials are documented, but they likely represent a tiny fraction of colonial violence. If this buried chapter of history affected you, subscribe to Fear Sermon for more investigations into the dark corners of our collective past. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover the next forgotten atrocity. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that history isn't just dates and names. It's the sum total of human choices, including our worst moments. Only by confronting these horrors honestly can we hope to prevent their recurrence. What other lost chapters of colonial brutality should we investigate next? Drop your suggestions in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you for watching. Remember, the past is never really past. Its shadows stretch into our present, and only by examining them can we hope to step into better light. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the darkness that history tried to bury.